Hey, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Oh, come on. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Hey, welcome to FCC. My name's Matt. I'm lucky enough to work here. And on behalf of our staff, I just want to say we are so glad that you're with us. This is going to be an awesome time. We're together for the next hour. We're going to sing some songs. We're going to hear a message. We're going to spend some great time together. We are so glad that you're here, whether you're joining us right here in the building, whether you're joining us online. It is wonderful to have you with us. Right now, November tends to be kind of a season of thankfulness, right? We talk a lot about what we're thankful for, and we spend time, hopefully, with people that we're thankful for. But also this last week, we celebrated something very special. We celebrated Veterans Day. And Veterans Day isn't just another day. It's not just a day to barbecue. Yeah, absolutely. But not to sound cliche, but someone posted something that kind of resonated with me really well. They said that veterans, no matter how long they served, no matter how long they ended their service, they all basically wrote a blank check. And that blank check included up to their lives for the sacrifice that they would make so that we could have the freedoms that we have. So if you are a veteran, if you're a granddaughter or a grandson, a great-grandson, a spouse of a veteran, we just want to say thank you so very much. I'm going to pray for our veterans and for their families, and then we're going to continue in our service. Please pray with me. Father God, you are so good. Lord, we really do enjoy so many freedoms that we have, Father, and we just want to thank all of the veterans who have paid with their sacrifice, Father. Those who have gone before us to make sure that we could have the freedoms that we have. Those who are currently serving and will hopefully, be able to end doing that soon. Those who have served, those family members of those who have served. God, we are just so thankful for our veterans. God, we're also so grateful for you. We're grateful for the freedom that we have to come here and to spend time with you, God, to come before your throne and to sing songs to you, to thank you for what you have done for us as well, Father. Thank you for sacrificing your son. Thank you for this time that we have together. Thank you for your church. Thank you for FCC. We love you so much. It's in your sons and we pray. Amen. We're going to continue our service right now by singing some songs. So I'd love to ask everyone to go ahead and stand up and just wave hi to someone in the room that you don't know.
I close my eyes and colors fly. There's no hiding from your grace. I can't deny your heart from mine, and it's unrelenting chase. I was on the edge of deception, caught up in my own hesitation, until your love took over me. Sing this out. So I go. changed the world, and it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise, treasures of fate are never enough. Then you came along, you put me back together. Now every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing
everybody. I'm going to have you stay standing because I'm just going to be out here for just a second. But my name's Scott. If you don't know me, I'm one of the pastors here. Just want to say welcome. Thank you for being here. I wanted to take a minute today just to update you on our kind of Generations campaign. If you're new, if this is your first time here, you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, and that's okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit. Last week, we kind of kicked off this thing called Generations, which is this 2-year initiative that we're doing as a church, and it's about unity. It's about the impact that we can make in our community and in our world, but also a big part of that is we're working toward reducing our debt. We have $6.5 million in debt that goes back, some of it goes back to like the mid-1980s. And so what we're trying to do over the next 2 years is trying to reduce our debt in half. And so we spent the last 6 weeks talking about the future of the church and where we're going and what we're doing and kind of sharing our vision. And we challenged people and asked people if they would be willing to make a commitment, a financial commitment, the largest 2-year financial commitment they've ever made to FCC or to any organization for that matter. And I just wanted to take a minute this week just to kind of let you know where we're at and where we're going. So there's still a lot of commitments that are trickling in. But just so you know, right now, we sit at 172 commitments. So 172 people or families have made commitments to the Generations campaign. And the total of that, it's like $3.88 million. It's basically $3.9 million is where we're at. Yeah. And there's again, that's 172, so there's still more commitments coming in, which the goal was to get, over the next 2 years, $11.5 million. But here's the really exciting part, because some people looked at it and were like, well, dude, are you bummed? We still have a long way to go. And I'm not bummed. I'm actually really, really excited. And it's not, just for the record, it's not because I am always an optimist. I'm not. I'm Generation X. I'm far too cynical to be optimistic. But here's the thing. In addition to that which is already committed, and if you haven't made a commitment, I really want to encourage you to make one. We already have, like in our possession, in the bank, $220,000 in cash to pay down toward debt is what's already been given strictly toward debt. That's not even the general fund. That's just going to the debt. So we said from the very beginning that December 6th, we were going to have, if you look in the Old Testament, when they would take offerings, they would do this thing called first fruits, where they would bring like the first part of their offering. And so we had designated early on that December 6th was going to be kind of like our first fruits. And all that means is that we're challenging people like, hey, if you're going to give, like maybe one big chunk before the end of the year, if you would consider doing it then, or even if you're not giving one big chunk, like me, I'm not giving one big chunk, my family's kind of giving it over the course of the 2 years, if you would kind of start or initiate your gift or increase your gift by December 6th. So we are going to make our first payment down directly toward the principal of debt after that weekend of December 6th. And again, so at this point, we already have $220,000, so it could go up. We could pay even more than that. So I'm really excited about where we're going. I'm really excited about what's happening, what God is doing. I thank you so much for your faithfulness and for your generosity, because again, this ultimately is not about money. Ultimately, it's about embracing and creating the future that God has for First Christian Church. And like Matt said in the very beginning, if you were here, we're in the season of thankfulness, of being thankful. And so we just want to the band's going to lead us with one more song, and we're going to take this time just to be thankful for everyone who gives, everyone who serves, to be thankful for our God, who is going to take everything that we give and multiply it and do things with it that we cannot possibly imagine. So whether you know this song or not, just invite you to kind of spend this time being grateful and being thankful for this church, being thankful for God and what it is he's doing in us and through us. So here we go.
To hide this weary soul, this bag of bones. I try with all my might, but I just can't win the fight. I'm slowly drifting, a vagabond. And just when I ran out of road, I met a man I didn't know.
Yeah, everybody, why don't you go ahead and grab a seat? Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for hanging out with us. Whether you're with us here on campus or if you're online, we're just glad that you're here today. So when I was in college, like 20 years ago, the Jerry Springer Show was at its height of popularity. So we're going to put up, I think we're going to put up, is this? There we go, yeah. There's my man, Jerry Springer. So this is like when his show, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this now, but like when I lived at the dorms in school, we would literally gather together in one dorm room just to watch the Jerry Springer Show. Now what's funny about Springer is like he was not the only show that had the kind of format that he had. In fact, there was people that pioneered it before him. I think like Phil Donahue was one of the first. Even Oprah's show kind of had that initially. And then even at the time that Springer was on, you had like Maury Povich and Montel Williams and Jenny Jones. And so there was a lot of shows that had this similar kind of format where you had a host and they would have guests on and they would kind of interview the guests and they would talk to the guests. But what made the Springer Show, what made Jerry Springer so famous, what made Jerry Springer stand out was the fighting. I mean, that's what it was. That if you ever watched Jerry Springer, it was just, and here's an actual picture that I Googled. This is a fight on the Jerry Springer Show. That here's these two ladies going at it, and I think this guy's a security guard trying to break them up because they're just yanking each other's hair. But this is what made Springer so famous, is you would have all these other shows where people would interview people and they would talk about controversy, but on Springer, it always ended up in a fight. And really, the longer the Jerry Springer Show went on, just the more chaotic it became, and it turned into brawls, and they would fight like over everything. I mean, there was all, like, anything. And I don't know, again, I don't know exactly what's going on in this episode. I don't know what these two ladies are fighting over, but I have this picture in my mind of what they're fighting over. And so I want to walk you through, just in case you've never seen the Jerry Springer Show, as someone who has consumed a lot of episodes of the Jerry Springer Show, I want to explain to you how you work, because there's a formula that the Jerry Springer Show uses that pretty much guarantees that this is where it's going to end up. And so again, I don't know that this is the situation, but as someone who watched a lot of Springer, what I'm going to describe to you is a very common situation, and it led to this. And so what would happen a lot of times is you would start out with one guest, and the first 10 to 15 minutes of every Jerry Springer episode was pretty mellow, because they would have one guest out there, and they would be interviewing that one guest, and that one guest would essentially be giving context to whatever the issue was. And so a common one had to do with relational difficulties. So they might bring a woman out there who is pregnant with her husband's baby. And so she's describing, hey, this is when I met my husband. We've been together for so long. You know, I'm 6 months pregnant with this baby. But then as she begins to talk, she tells, the story goes on and says, well, I just recently found out that he's been cheating on me with my best friend. And so she would keep describing this, and here's the beauty of the formula of the Jerry Springer Show, is for the first 10 to 15 minutes, you have, in this case, a woman who is describing like the most painful part of her life. And she's describing this betrayal by her best friend and by her husband. These people are supposed to love her. And as she's describing this, she's getting amped up. Right? Because if you talk about the most painful part of your life, if you talk about betrayal, like you just get amped up and you get angry. Now, at the same time this is happening, at the same time this woman on stage is getting amped up, the best friend is behind stage listening to her friend trash her. So you have the person on stage that they're getting all amped up because they're reliving their most painful moment. You have someone backstage who's just getting trashed on national TV. And so eventually, after about 10 or 15 minutes, Jerry Springer would say, okay, well, let's bring on your best friend who's cheating with your husband. And then they bring the friend on stage, and you have these two people who are now both like emotionally at their peak. Because the one is angry because they've been lied to and cheated. The other one's now angry because they've been trashed on national TV. And so, of course, this is what happens. That's the formula. And the formula keeps going on through the rest of the show because, you know, they'll get them amped up, and then eventually they'll bring out the husband. Right? And he's all amped up because he's been getting trashed now for a half hour. And so what's interesting is when you look at the way they would structure the Jerry Springer Show, there's a formula. There's a formula that guarantees this is where it's going to go because, hey, let's just get everybody super amped up and then put them together. It's essentially like setting a bomb off in the middle of this situation. Now, here's what's really, really interesting to me is I believe it was 2018. In 2018, the Jerry Springer Show went off the air. After like 27 seasons and over 5,000 episodes, the show went off the air. But what's fascinating to me is if you look around at the world and the culture in which we live, we are essentially in like one giant episode of the Jerry Springer Show. And I'm being serious because think about this for a minute. Think about this for a minute. The way our culture functions, the way our culture operates, we use the exact same formula that the Jerry Springer Show used in order to create conflict and fighting. Because here's what happens. As people, as individuals, we spend all of our time consuming, particularly media. We consume media that fuels our own biases, that fuels our own trigger points, that fuels our own view. And so whether it's the newspapers that we read or the specific channels that we watch or the magazines that we read, wherever we get our media from, we are reading and consuming the media that agrees with us, and it fuels us. And it fuels our fears, and it fuels our insecurities, and it fuels our worries. Then we go on social media. And if you know anything about social media, you know that the way social media is designed to work is it's designed to keep you engaged. That's the whole point. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, they want to keep you on the platform as long as they can. So they create algorithms, and what the algorithm does is it feeds you stuff that you want to hear, stuff that you will click on, stuff that you will like, stuff that you will interact with. So your social media is not like an unbiased thing. It's literally geared toward feeding you exactly what you want to hear. And so you and I spend all this time just consuming all of this media that's just reinforcing everything we think, and it's reinforcing our fears, and it's reinforcing our insecurities. Now, at the same time, there's someone else out there doing the exact same thing from the complete opposite perspective. So they're watching media from a different view, and it's different from yours, and their social media feed gives something different from them. So now you have these two people that are both just getting fueled up. They're getting riled up. Right, because they're reading all this stuff about how the other side is the enemy and this people is the enemy and what's wrong with them and what's wrong with them. So everybody gets riled up, and then you get together at work or at the park or for a family holiday or wherever, and of course, this is what happens. That's what it's designed to do. And so the sad reality is that what used to be just entertainment, that was the whole point of the Jerry Springer Show, is you'd watch at it and you'd sit back and laugh and go, oh, look how dysfunctional, look how messed up this is. I mean, it was kind of like this ironic humor. Now, this is essentially our culture. And we use that same formula to get riled up and then go at it, And don't raise your hand. Please don't raise your hand. But how many of us, if we're honest, if your family, like your whole family, was going to get together for Thanksgiving, this is what it would look like. See, this is where we are as a culture. This is the way, everything's set up. We use this formula in order to rally each other up so that we will fight. It's almost like this is inevitable. This is the inevitable consequence of the way that our culture and our society is set up. And really the arguments, man, you don't need me to the arguments are politics, COVID, sexuality, identity, climate change, critical race theory, violence, all of that. And when you look statistically, you can see this. Just look at statistics of what's happening. I found this one. It's a fascinating statistic. 1 in 7 people in this country have said they ended a relationship. Ended. So it's not just like, hey, we disagreed, not just like, hey, we're angry, but literally, you and I are not friends anymore. We're not speaking. You're dead to me. 1 in 7 people in this country have ended a relationship over vaccine status. That's it. Just, you're vaccinated, I'm not, or vice versa, whichever way it goes. We are no longer friends because one of us is vaccinated and the other one is not. There's been an increase in breakups and divorces. Pew Research did a poll, and they asked an open-ended question. They said, hey, in what area of your life has the pandemic, the last year and a half, 2 years, in what area of your life has been most negatively impacted by the pandemic? And overwhelmingly, the number one response was relationships. In May 2021, there was an American Perspective survey that said Americans report having less close friends, talking to their close friends less, and relying on their close friends less for support than they ever have. So when you look over the past couple years and you look at the impacts that COVID and the pandemic and all that stuff has had on our culture, on our society, it's devastating. I mean, first of all, obviously, it's most devastating in terms of health. The number of people that have died, the number of people that have suffered. And then when you spread it out and go beyond health, the way it's impacted the economy, the way it's impacted education, but also relationally. it's been devastating for us as people relationally. And this, the relational aspect of it, this is kind of what we want to focus on over the next few weeks as we begin to approach the holiday season. Is what we want to talk about is we find ourselves in the midst of this, within our cultures, and again, honestly, for a lot of us, it's within our own families. This is the situation we find ourselves in. How do we live in the middle of this situation? And specifically what we want to ask is we want to say, hey, how as a church and how as followers of Jesus should we live in the midst of all this? And I want to tip my hat right from the very beginning and make it totally clear what I'm going to say. I believe with all my heart that the only way forward in the middle of this is through Jesus. Now, I know there's some of us that are here, some of us that are watching online, that we would not describe ourselves as Christians. We would not describe ourselves as followers of Jesus. And so when I say like, hey, Jesus is the way forward, you're thinking to yourself, yeah, right, that's a lame answer. And let me just say, I have heard in my life plenty of times people present a problem and say Jesus is the answer and then give no explanation as to why Jesus is the answer. It's like, well, here's this problem. Oh, Jesus is the answer. How? He just is. So I get that when you say that, like, oh, Jesus is the answer, Jesus, I get that that's like, okay, well, whatever. So here's what I want to do today, is today I want to explain to you why I think that. Why I believe that not only is Jesus really the best way forward, in a lot of ways I think Jesus is the only way forward. And then what we're going to do is spend the next 2 weeks really like diving down specifically and saying, hey, practically, let's talk about how do we live in the midst of all this. What does it actually look like to be a church and to be a follower of Jesus, living the way that he lived in the midst of all this? But today, I want to start by talking about why I think that Jesus is the only way forward in the midst of all this. But to understand that, we have to go back way before Jesus. To understand that, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. The Bible opens up with a book that's called Genesis. In Genesis, that word literally means origins. And Genesis is ancient Israel's like story of where they came from. The first 12 chapters of Genesis are what's known as like kind of, they're not just origins of the nation of Israel, they're origins of existence, of humanity, of the universe. Once you get to Genesis 12 and forward, the rest of Genesis deals specifically with the origins of Israel as a nation and the people of Israel and who become the Hebrew people and ultimately the Jewish people. But the first 12 chapters of Genesis are like, hey, the origins of humanity and earth and creation and where it all came from. And so Genesis 1 starts off by talking about where everything came from, the source of earth and human beings and plants and animals and all of that. And so here's how the ancient Israelite creation story begins. This was their core belief. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. Those are probably the four most difficult words in the Bible to accept. Because really, if you can accept that in the beginning there was God, honestly, the rest of the Bible is pretty easy to accept. But that's not always easy to accept. That's the difficult part, that there is a God. And that God is somehow above and transcends everything that we see, that we know as like physical and reality. But this is how the ancient Israelite, this is how they understood the origins. This was their creation story. And this is how they told it. This was their core belief, that before everything here, that there was a God. And that God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God, literally the presence of God, was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. And so the ancient Israelites, the way they understood the world is that God created everything that was. And he spoke it into existence. And he created it intentionally. And he created it with this phrase, let there be, let there be. And so God spoke, and then he allowed creation to basically spring to life. And everything that God created was created exactly the way he wanted it to be. Because notice what he says. It's good. God saw the light, and it was good. It's exactly the way that I want it to be. That word good there, if you look at it in Hebrew, because the Old Testament's originally written in Hebrew, that word good literally means without defect, pure, prosperous, well off. It's perfect. It's the way it's supposed to be, and it's kind of got this ongoing health to it. And that's the way that God creates everything. The ancient Israelite creation story in Genesis 1 kind of concludes with this same phrase. Here's what it says. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. So everything that is because it's the way God designed it, and everything that God created was good. It's exactly what he wanted it to be, and it wasn't static. God didn't create creation to be static. He created it to change and to grow, and it was well off. It was good. It was prosperous. There's a Hebrew word that was used to describe this kind of existence, this kind of reality. It's a word you may have heard before. It's the word shalom. Shalom is most often translated as peace. And so shalom is a common greeting that is used within the Jewish tradition. It's kind of a hello. It's also kind of a goodbye, peace to you. So most of the time we use it as peace. But even more than that, shalom literally means wholeness or completeness. It's a sense of well-being. It's undivided. So this is creation at the very beginning. When God creates it, and when he creates everything exactly the way he wants it, the world, the universe, Genesis talks about the stars, the clouds, the land, human beings, men and women, all of it. When God creates all of it is very good. All of it is complete. All of it is whole. All of it is prosperous. It's doing what it was designed to do. And so in the midst of creation, there is shalom. There's peace. There's this completeness. There's this well-being. But then when you get to Genesis 3, in the middle of this shalom, there's essentially a bomb that goes off and just kind of messes up all of it. Here's what Genesis 3 says. Genesis 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. Now, we're never told in Genesis 1 exactly who the serpent is. Historically, people have always identified it with like Satan or the devil. Interesting thing about Satan is the word Satan literally just means adversary. So the serpent is somehow, it's just an adversary of God. Someone who is against God. So the serpent's more crafty, and the serpent had said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. And you must not touch it or you will die." "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of it and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So Genesis 3, the beginning of Genesis 3, this is where in the midst of this shalom, there's this bomb that goes off. And it happens because this adversary comes in and begins talking to people. And it's interesting what the adversary says, if you know it, because people were basically given dominion over creation. If you read Genesis 2, and God tells them, "Hey, I'm putting you in charge. You're the pinnacle of creation." Human beings are the only part of creation that's made in the image of God, which doesn't mean we necessarily look like God. It means we were created to reflect God's character. And so we were given dominion of it, and there was just this one thing that, hey, just don't eat from this one tree. You can do everything else, just don't eat from this one tree. And so this adversary comes along, and notice the adversary just kind of basically twists things a little bit. Because it doesn't even say, "Hey, just go eat from the tree." The adversary says, "Hey, did God really tell you not, that you couldn't eat from any trees?" Doesn't highlight the one, just, "Hey, did he really say you couldn't eat from any tree?" And the woman, we're told these first two people, they're given the names Adam and Eve. This woman replies and she says, "Well, he didn't tell us any tree. He just said this one tree." Now, here's the thing. If Genesis 1 is correct, right, if this ancient Israelite understanding of creation is correct, then the only way that you and I can ever relate to God is in kind of a hierarchical relationship. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean to say the core of Genesis 1 is that God is, and he is the creator, and we are a part of creation. Now, we may be the pinnacle of creation, but we are still a creature. We are still created. And so the only way as a part of creation we can ever really live in connection with God is there's a hierarchy there. That God is in charge because he's the creator. And so for us to live in peace with God requires submission. That's the essence of Genesis 1, that the way that we as human beings live in connection with God is there is a hierarchy, that he is God and we are not. He is the creator, we are part of the creation. He's the master, we're the servant. There's submission there. Now notice what the adversary does that's really, really clever. The adversary basically says, "Hey, look, this God that told you not to eat from that tree, he's actually holding out on you. That God has, according to Genesis 1 and 2, God has created all of this, and he's given all of it to human beings. That the ancient Israelites understood God as this God who provides and this God who gives. And the serpent comes along and says, yeah, not really. He's actually the God who's holding out on you. He's actually the God who's keeping something from you. And notice what the temptation is. The temptation is, don't be subordinate to God. Be equal to him. See, God is holding out on you. God is not the God who provides. God is the God who restricts. God is the God of laws and commands. And look at you, he's telling you to not do this thing. He's only doing that because he knows if you do this, then you'll be like him. And you'll be equal with him. And so the whole thing, it's super clever, but it's a distortion of everything. That's why when Jesus, when you get to the New Testament, Jesus talks about the adversary. When Jesus talks about Satan or the devil, he says, hey, his native language is lying. That's what he does, he lies. And so Genesis 3 is this, it's super clever, but it's twisting everything about reality. And so the first human beings say, oh, yeah, well, hey, that sounds good. I don't want God to hold out on me. I want something more. I mean, that's the temptation, is that there's more. God's not the God who provides. God's not the God who gives. He's the God who holds out. And if you do this, then you'll have what you really want. And so they go ahead and they eat. But when they eat, things don't exactly go as planned. And instead of this great feeling, instead of this equality with God, what they end up experiencing is shame and guilt to the point that they begin to hide themselves. See, what I've always found so interesting about the story of Genesis 1 through 3, the kind of creation and the fall story, is when you look at it, my kids, when I used to tell them that story, my son especially, he used to get mad at Adam and Eve, and he used to say, they blew it for everybody. But what's really interesting is when you look at the story in Genesis 1 is it's about people, but it's not just about some people. It's actually about all people. Like Adam and Eve, those names, they're super generic names. They literally mean, Adam's name means humankind, and Eve means the mother of all that is living. The whole point of Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is that when you and I read it, we're not reading someone else's story, we're reading our own story. Because how many times in our life have we done something that we thought, man, when I do this, this will be great. When I do this, I'll feel good. When I do this, I'll feel happy. When I do this, I will have achieved something. And then you do it, and all you're left with is shame and guilt, and you just want to hide. See, that's the story of Genesis 1, 2, 3. That's the story of humanity. Now, when that happens in Genesis, and when there is that kind of rebellion, the word the biblical writers use is sin, is when there's that sin, then everything begins to fall apart. And God shows up, and God announces, he says, hey, because of what you've done, now all of creation is cursed. And God announces consequences. That there's for what you've done, there's consequences. And that's the basic thing in life, all right? We all know that for all of our actions, there are consequences, good or bad consequences. And God shows up and says, because of what you've done, there's consequences. And as he describes the consequences, here's some of the words he uses to describe the consequences. That there's a curse now. And now there's pain. And now there's enmity. So now for the first time in the story of creation, now these words begin to appear. And there's talk about death. And God says, because of what you've done, you will now eventually be reduced to dust. And so what happens as a result of Genesis 3, as a result of this rebellion, is that the shalom that defined creation is gone. That completeness, that wholeness, that sense of peace that was there, that God created everything with, it's gone because now it's been replaced with curses and with enmity and with pain. And the way God created it, it's not what God intended it to be. You ever looked around the world and thought, why did God create it this way? The answer of Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is he didn't. This is what we have done with it. Things are not as they should be. That's the whole point. Shalom that defines early creation is now gone. And so now when you're at this point and toward the end of Genesis 3, it's like, well, what happens now? I mean, God created everything, and now it's like this bomb has just gone off. And everything's a mess. Everything's chaotic. The rest of the biblical story, from that point, from Genesis 3 on, is a story of how God is working to save his creation and ultimately restore it to shalom. Because what God does is he stays with Adam and Eve. He provides coverings for them. Now again, there's consequences to what they've done because there's always consequences to our actions. You can't escape that. That's a reality of life. But God chooses to stay with them and begins to work to figure out, hey, how do I save my creation and bring it back? And so that's the rest of the biblical story, is how is God going to go about saving his creation? Now, the pinnacle of that story, the pinnacle of the story of God saving creation happens in the person of Jesus. And the climax of Jesus' life is his death and his resurrection. Now, what's really interesting is when you look at the death of Jesus, when you look at really just before his death, one of the themes of the death of Jesus is this theme of darkness. That Jesus is God in the flesh. God comes down to earth in the person of Jesus himself in order to save his creation, in order to bring about the shalom. And Jesus lives his life, and ultimately he's betrayed by one of his closest followers. He's arrested, he's put on trial, and he's killed. But one of the themes of that whole thing is darkness. That when Jesus is betrayed by one of his closest followers, when he's arrested, when he's put on trial, it all happens at night. And even when they crucify Jesus, like we're told in the Gospels, or Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 books that tell us about the life of Jesus. In the Gospels, when you look at it, Jesus is hung on the cross outside from I think it's like noon to 3 or something like that is when they're describing it, the middle of the day. But when you listen to the accounts of the crucifixion, it's also dark. That there's darkness. And even Jesus himself, if you look at Luke 22, verse 53, as he's talking, this is Jesus at his own trial. Here's what he says, "But this is your hour when darkness reigns." So one of the big themes of the death of Jesus is this idea of darkness. And that's intentional. Like that is 100% intentional. When the gospel writers wrote about it, because what they wanted to emphasize, because it came from Jesus, is that during this moment, during this whole experience of the betrayal and the trial and the death of Jesus, this is when the powers of evil that exist within the world were doing their worst. Because even now, even in our culture now, we have these themes of like light and darkness. Right? And there's evil that comes in the form of dark. And so during Jesus' death, all the powers of evil in the world, they're actually doing their worst. This is the moment when darkness reigns. This is the moment when darkness is in charge. And it's under darkness that Jesus dies. And he's buried. And a few days later, he resurrects. Now, one thing you have to understand in the ancient world, the idea of resurrection, when that word is used, when specifically the word resurrection is used, it's never used to refer to life after death. You know, like when we have, like in movies, when people die, you know, like all dogs go to heaven type thing. You know, someone dies and then they're up in the heavens and they have clouds and all that stuff, but they're like kind of a ghost of themselves. That's not what the word resurrection means in the ancient world. The word resurrection in the ancient world means your physical body comes back to life. Now, it was a fairly common belief within first century Jews that at the end of time, there would be this like kind of mass resurrection. But it was literally like zombie status, like people climbing out of the graves, that resurrection meant your physical body. So there was a lot of Jewish people who believed that at the end of time, there would be this kind of like mass resurrection. But there is no one who believed that one person was going to resurrect before everyone else did. And so when Jesus dies, no one thinks he's coming back. When Jesus dies, basically all his closest followers were like, well, guess we were wrong. We bet on the wrong horse. Our bad. But then Jesus does come back. And this is why at first no one believes him and no one understands it. People are like, I need to see it to believe it. No one thought this was happening, but Jesus resurrects. But here's what's interesting. When the gospel writers describe Jesus' post-resurrection body, it is his physical body, but it is different. Like there's one point where he's talking to a couple of his followers, and at first they don't even recognize him. And he can make his way through like closed doors. He just appears in rooms and then he disappears. So it is very much his physical body, because at one point his followers like feel his wounds. So it is his physical body. But what defines his new physical body? One of the words that's used to define it is this word like glory. It's light. That Jesus has gone through the darkness and he's come out of it in light. In that Jesus going to the cross endured the worst in order to bring about something that is brand new. See, what's fascinating is when we talk about the death of Jesus, most of the time within Christianity, within churches, we talk about the death of Jesus from a legal standpoint. And what I mean by that is like, hey, we messed up, we made a mistake, we sinned. There has to be consequences for that. The consequences is death. Jesus paid the consequences for us, so now we're right, now we're forgiven, and now we can go to heaven. And it's very much transactional, and it's legal, that Jesus makes right our mistakes. And there's truth to that. That language appears in the New Testament. That's the word redeem. The only other place I know that we use the word redeem is Chuck E. Cheese. Because when you go to Chuck E. Cheese, you take your tickets, right? And you turn in, here's the tickets that I have, and you redeem it for a prize. Like, that's the whole idea. You buy it back. I'm giving you these tickets, and now you're giving me something else. That language shows up in the New Testament, that Jesus redeems us. He buys us back. But to reduce the death and the resurrection of Jesus to just a legal transaction is to miss the totality of what it is that God is doing through the death and the resurrection of Jesus. That it's so much more than that. That yes, he's redeeming us. Yes, he's offering us grace. Yes, he's offering forgiveness. But it's so much more than that. That Jesus goes through the worst. Jesus goes through the darkness and emerges in light. That he goes through all of the evil and the injustice of the world. And he comes out the other side. He conquers it. He overcomes it. That literally the death and the resurrection of Jesus is the means by which God is overcoming all evil, all injustice. And here's what Paul's the guy who writes like 2/3 of the New Testament. Here's what Paul says about the death and resurrection of Jesus in Ephesians. Ephesians 1, verse 9 through 10. Paul says, he, talking about God, made known to us the mystery of his will. And I love that Paul uses this word mystery. Because what Paul's basically saying is, he's saying, look, God has been up to something since the beginning. We just haven't seen it. But now in Jesus, now we see it. Now in Jesus, we finally understand what God was up to. And Paul's going to describe it. He says, here's the mystery. Here's the mystery of what God has been up to since the very beginning. The mystery of his will, according to his good pleasure, which he proposed in Christ, to be put into effect when the times reach their fulfillment. And here it is, to bring unity to all things in heaven and on earth under Christ. Paul says, here's the mystery of what God has been up to. And now in Jesus, we finally see it. That what God is doing in Jesus is he's bringing everything in heaven on earth. Remember, go back to Genesis. What does Genesis say? In the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. That in Jesus, God is bringing everything back together. That he's making it right. That what Jesus is doing isn't just about human beings. That, yeah, we're a big part of it, but it's bigger than that. It's about all of creation. In fact, it's bigger than all of creation. It's about all earth and all heaven. That in Jesus, through his death and his resurrection, God is making everything right, and he's bringing it all back together under the person of Jesus. In 2 Corinthians, Paul will actually use the word, he'll say reconcile. That in Jesus, God is reconciling the world to himself. That Jesus is God's answer to what happens in Genesis 3. How do you undo what happens in Genesis 3? How do you undo this bomb that goes off? Jesus is ultimately God's answer to undoing what happened in Genesis 3. Jesus is how God is going to bring shalom back to all of his creation. And so through Jesus, through his death and resurrection, God is reconciling. Now again, a lot of times we think of the term reconciliation transactionally. Because you'll have pastors or theologians or even academics, Bible scholars that will talk about how, yeah, God reconciles us to himself. That because of Jesus, we can have peace with God. And because of Jesus, we can have, peace in our own lives. And that is true. Jesus is the means by which we have peace with God. Because whatever was wrong in our relationship with God, Jesus, through his death and resurrection, he makes it right. But again, if we only understand reconciliation with kind of this vertical understanding, we miss that the death and resurrection of Jesus also has a horizontal aspect to it. That reconciliation is not just about us and God. It's about us and each other. Later on in Ephesians 2, Paul will write this. Paul will say, for he himself, Jesus, is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and with its regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace. And in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. And so Paul says, yes, that there is an aspect of the death and resurrection of Jesus, that's what reconciles us to God. This is why we can be right with God. Also, the death and resurrection of Jesus is what's reconciling all creation. Paul will write in Romans that all of creation longs to be restored. And that ultimately the death and resurrection of Jesus is God's means of bringing shalom back to all of creation. But Paul goes even further and says, what I need you to understand is the death and resurrection of Jesus is the means by which you and I, as human beings, are reconciled to one another. That part of what Jesus did on the cross wasn't just to erase the sin and the division that exists within creation, the chaos that exists within creation. It's also the chaos within ourselves and our own lives and our own relationships and our own families and our own culture and our own nation. See, here's what you and I need to understand. Here's what Paul's getting at. Here's what the biblical story is getting at. Is that ultimately, peace is a gift that is given through Jesus. And again, I know this sounds basic, but here's the thing. What many of us are trying to do right now is we are trying to earn peace. And how do we think we earn peace? By getting you to agree with me. So we sit down and let's talk. Let's talk about an issue. Take an issue. COVID, vaccines, masks, politics, critical race theory, education, whatever. And we think the only way that we can have peace is if you and I sit down and if we get on the same page. And so we spend all this time and presenting, here's the data, here's the facts. I've done my own research, and this person's done their own research. And then we literally get frustrated because as great as our research is, and as much as our articles show this, they have that, and then we just walk away frustrated. Because what essentially we're trying to do is we're trying to earn peace. We're trying to create peace. You cannot create peace. You can't. I don't care how much research you've done. I don't care how solid your numbers are. I don't care how right you think you are. You can't do it. Peace is a gift that is given. I choose to live at peace with you. You choose to live at peace with me. Not because I agree with you. Not because you agree with me. Not because we see eye to eye, but because we love each other. And here's Paul's point. Here's why this is so important. Is in order for us to be at peace, even if we have different differences, even if you and I have different opinions on this, on that, or whatever, the only way we live at peace is that there is something that is more important to us than that issue. And this is what Paul's getting at when he writes to the church in Ephesus. He says, listen, to the church in Ephesus, what you have that is more important than any political issue, any pandemic issue, any other thing, is Jesus. And so guess what? You don't have to agree with each other. You don't have to. It doesn't matter if you agree with each other. Because what's more important to you is Jesus. Because Jesus is the means by which God is reconciling everything. This is why, like, all the division in the church, I mean, it drives me crazy, but I think God is like scratching his head going, what happened? There's something bigger that unites us. That we are all children of God, made in the image of God. And if that's what we hold on to as what's most important, then guess what? It doesn't matter if we disagree on these political issues. We can disagree. Because guess what? Whether or not you think this, or whether or not you think that, or whether or not you voted this way, or whether or not you registered this way, like, that doesn't matter. Again, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying we shouldn't care about these things or make choices, but what I'm saying is what peace requires is that there is something that we care about above everything else. And this is why the New Testament writers will say over and over again what it means to be a follower of Jesus. The word we might use would be Christian. What it means to be a Christian is that you center your life around the person of Jesus. And when you center your life around the person of Jesus, then nothing else is more important than him. And so when you keep reminding yourself that, Jesus is more important than masks. Jesus is more important than this politics. Jesus is more important than this person's view on this or that or this or that. That's what allows us to live at peace. Because there's something that matters more than these other things. And that is Jesus. See, peace, we have to stop trying to earn peace. We have to stop trying to create peace. We, as a church, those of us who would call ourselves followers of Jesus, we just have to learn to receive it. That I can be at peace. And why can I be at peace? because of what Jesus has done. I can be at peace with myself, even with all my own sins and my own failures and my own guilt and shame. You know why I can have peace in my own life? Because of what Jesus has done for me, because of his death and resurrection. You know why I can have peace with you, even though you're an idiot and you're wrong and all your research is stupid and all your viewpoints are wrong? You know why I can have peace with you? Because Jesus has done the same thing for you. In that the same way he has made my shortcomings right, and in the same way he's reconciling everything, and he's bringing back shalom to my life, he's bringing back shalom to your life. And so even though we disagree, that's okay. We don't have to divide. We don't have to break up. We don't have to stop. Why? Because go back to Paul. Jesus is our peace. Now here's where it gets tricky. Peace is a gift. And instead of trying to earn it, instead of trying to create it, we just have to receive it. But once you receive it, it takes work to maintain it. Paul writes this in Ephesians 4, 2-3. He says, be completely and humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. And this is what's going to guide us for the next 2 weeks. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Peace is a gift that we receive through Jesus, but it takes work to maintain it. It takes effort. That's what Paul says. Make every effort. You and I have to receive peace within ourselves, between us and God, and between us and one another, because of what God has done and is doing through Jesus. He's reconciling everything, bringing it all back to himself. Jesus becomes our peace in every area of our life. But then it takes effort. And that word effort talks about sacrifice. And it talks about submission. And it talks about compromise. And it talks about patience. And it talks about forgiveness. So that's what we're going to spend the next 2 weeks unpacking, is how do we work to maintain the peace? But today I want to start with us by understanding it is a gift. And you and I need to receive it. Not earn it, not create it, but receive it. Because if we don't receive it, we will never experience it. This is why I think that Jesus, and Jesus alone, really is our way forward. Because the only way to find peace in all of creation is through his death and resurrection. Let me pray. Father, I thank you so much for what it is that you have done for us. I thank you that you came down to this earth and you died and you rose again. And through your death and your resurrection, you overcame the powers of darkness. You faced the worst that this world has to offer. And you overcame it. You came out on the other side. And in doing so, you've made a whole new way forward. Paul talks about a new humanity, a new creation. You're reconciling the world. You're bringing everything back to shalom, including us as people, in ourselves, but also in our relationships with one another. Father, the only way that we have peace is when we have you at the center of our life. Because when you're at the center of our life, now there's something that matters more to us than being right. There's something that matters more to us than being correct. There's something that matters more to us than our view or our opinion. God, as we approach these holiday seasons, Father, I pray that they're a lot of fun. I pray that we have fun getting together with friends and family and celebrating. I pray that hopefully maybe we can take some time off to celebrate and reflect. That'll be a good time, a time of renewal and refreshing. But God, I pray above all else, it will be a time of peace. But being a time of peace begins with our surrendering to you, with our making you our source of peace. Father, help us to be peacemakers in the midst of an angry, divided world. God, we love you. We thank you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Shame into glory. You're the only
Man, I gotta be honest, y'all sound amazing. Band, you guys sound ridiculously awesome. Hey, a couple things I just want to talk about before we take off today. You can stay standing or sit down, it's totally up to you. But I gotta be honest with you, and that's a good thing. I have never been more excited to be a part of a faith community. Just being honest. Yes, I get to work here, but I'm also a part of this church family, and I love everything that we're doing right now. I love seeing you guys. You can clap for that for sure. I love seeing faces that I've seen in the more than 30 years I've been going here. I love faces that I've seen that I've never seen before, because that means you guys are inviting your friends, your family, your neighbors. And this is just an awesome thing that we all get to be a part of. It's a privilege to be a part of this faith community. And speaking of inviting, you know, I can't believe it to say it, but Thanksgiving's just around the corner. Christmas is almost here. We have our live nativity is only a matter of weeks away. We have amazing Christmas Eve services we're going to have. We have a toy drive for people who can't afford toys or maybe a little financially insecure right now. We have a toy store where you can invite anyone in your community to come over here, bring them with you, and shop here for toys for Christmas for totally free, just so that we can make sure the kids have something to open on Christmas. We have so much coming up, and now you have a role that you play. It is our opportunity, it is our responsibility to be inviting people to FCC, right? There's nothing better than being invited. We have so many people in our community that want to be invited to something, and I'm putting that on your shoulders. Whether it's coming to the toy store to shop, whether it's hopping into our growth track that we have coming up, whether it's a growth track book club, whether it's coming to Christmas services, or whatever it is coming through the live nativity, it is your responsibility. Please don't have someone in your life that you say, man, I really wish they'd show up at church. I really wish I'd see them at FCC. That's on you. Now, I got to be honest, last year and a half, we've gotten really close with the people that we're close with, right? Like really close. Those people that are in our bubble or were in our bubble during dark times, man, we got really close. We got to know each other well, so we know that our friends are hurting. We know that our friends need hope and they need peace and they need grace, and that is our opportunity to invite people to everything that we're doing. So today, Scott's message was just amazing, and it challenged me so much, but I also want to challenge you that if you have someone in your life that is not a part of our community, it's on you to invite them to whatever it might be. Before we head out today, whether you're joining us online or you're in person, we would love to encourage you to take communion. If you're here on campus, go down to the chapel. Spend some time in the presence of God, just thanking Him for the peace that He has given you so freely, thanking Him for the sacrifice that He made in His Son. And if you're joining us online, you can go to fcchb.com/communion, where you can see some communion videos there that you can watch. We love you guys so much, are so grateful for you, and we hope that you have an awesome, safe week. See you next week.